I watched Patricia, my wife of 25 years, standing next to Stefan Truscott, her boss. He was loading her last suitcases into the trunk of his fancy car. He'd picked her up Sunday morning because they had an important meeting in New York City on Monday. They were flying out that afternoon to prepare for a deposition with the opposing counsel before entering the final stages of a major lawsuit. Patricia, despite being married for 25 years, was still a very attractive woman. She was 5'7", with a toned physique, although she'd packed on a few pounds over the years, as we all do. Her jet black hair, emerald green eyes, and curvy figure still had an undeniable magnetism. She had just turned 44, and looking at her, I was reminded of the gorgeous 18-year-old girl I'd fallen in love with. We had married right after high school, and I had put myself through school online while she went to college. Those years had treated her well, and having kids didn't seem to affect her looks much. After she graduated from law school, we moved back here near family when our first 2 kids were born. Isabella came along the first year she started practicing law. I stood there, watching Stefan, with a mix of emotions. I had to admit I didn't like the smug look he had hidden behind his smile. Looking into his eyes, I could see the smirk he reserved for me. His over-the-top confidence rubbed me the wrong way. 2 more seconds, and I'd have grabbed him and taught him a lesson he wouldn't forget. I wanted to say something, but I held back. He wasn't good enough for Patricia, and she wasn't good enough for him. They were going, as Patricia explained to us several times, for a final push to settle a major civil case they were working on before going to trial. She was so focused on her agenda, she didn't realize I already knew something else was going on. The thing is, I knew from a reliable source that wasn't the only reason they were going. That source was a woman named Abigail, who identified herself as Stefan's wife. She had called me and wanted to warn me about their plans. They were flying to St. Louis in an hour, then connecting to New York City tonight. Their first meeting with opposing counsel was set for 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. We offered to drive my wife to the airport to say goodbye, but she flatly refused. Stefan would be leaving his car at the airport while he was gone. Clearly, they wanted to keep this under wraps. What pissed me off the most was they never said when they would be back. Honestly, Stefan wasn't all that different from me. Maybe a couple of inches taller, but come on. He was 6 years younger, but no more in shape. Still, he was a handsome man. I knew it would be a fair fight, as long as I didn't get carried away and wind up kicking him in the back and taking a knee. Isabella, my daughter, sensing my thoughts, stood in front of me, making sure I didn't have a chance to jump down the steps and go after Stefan. She was smart. She knew if I moved, she'd have to move to keep me behind her. She was protecting me from myself. We stood on the front porch waving goodbye. No doubt, Patricia was looking forward to some wild nights with her new squeeze in the bright lights of the big city. She'd been invited to join the firm 6 years ago, and since getting promoted to junior partner at that law firm 2 years ago, our life had changed, and not for the better. Power seemed to have gone to her head. Nobody knew, except me, that Abigail had contacted me a few weeks ago, giving me a lot of details about Stefan's previous relationships with women who worked for him. Abigail told me this was the last time he was going to do this to her. He was getting caught. As Stefan's car disappeared from sight, Isabella and I went inside. "Dad, do you think Mom knows we know about his plans?" Isabella asked. "Stefan has a few more notches on his belt with her." "Probably not," I said. "She's never been able to see past the smoke and mirrors, even with her legal mind. If she heard rumors about his past behavior, she'd dismiss them because she never buys into useless gossip. With her legal mind, she still can't grasp the simple truth that gossip always starts with a basis of truth about the person themselves. Your mother still sees the world, and the people in it, through rose-colored glasses. But she's going into this relationship with her eyes wide open, believing she won't be caught. For her, it's always out of sight and out of mind. For her, she'll view this as a steamy getaway from the mundane routine of our daily lives," I explained. "It'll be a rude awakening when she's forced to realize she's just another one of the many women he's taken advantage of. Even worse, she'll have to face the reality of what she's done." My daughter looked at me seriously and said, "Why would Mom do that? If she feels this way, why doesn't she try to stop him?" "You know your mother as well as I do," I said. "If I tell her not to have an affair, she'll deny that she's planning on doing it. She'll just say I'm jealous, childish, and immature. The discussion about it will go downhill from there. We'll end up in a big, pointless argument. She'll leave in a huff at me and continue her plan as soon as they turn the first corner. Her mind is made up. There's nothing we can say or do to change her decision." "Does his wife know what's going on?" Isabella asked. "Yes, and her father does too," I said. "They have the paperwork drawn up to serve them when they catch them. This isn't the first time he's done this. Abigail has the names of other women he's called his new love interest. Her kids are old enough where she can easily manage their needs without him. That's why she decided to end the charade they call a marriage. He'll be served divorce papers for adultery, and my wife will be served papers for interference with a marriage." "Do you forgive Mom?" Isabella asked, with concern in her voice. "Not this time," I said. "I did it once. For me, this time is different, and she's not going to get a pass. It's time for me to cut my losses and move on." The moment she left, the divorce started. She had a second chance, and she blew it. I'll never forget the look on my daughter's face, because she never knew, and neither did any of our children. She must have been shocked to learn that their mother had been unfaithful once before. "Dad, you should explain that statement," Isabella said, "because it doesn't make any sense." "Isabella, since you're the youngest, what I'm telling you is just between us," I said. "The last time was before she found out she was pregnant with you, and it lasted until she started showing. If you'd been his child, I would have left her. Thankfully, the blood test proved you were mine." The look of shock on my 18-year-old daughter's face was priceless. It was a family secret that only 3 people knew. For the sake of the family, we kept it a secret like that. "Who is he? Do we know him?" Isabella asked. "He's someone I haven't talked to in 18 years, I said. "You all call him Uncle Thomas." Isabella sat down and took it all in. For her, it was all becoming clear. If there was a family event that Thomas attended, her dad never came. Her mom always took them, but she made sure she stayed away from Thomas. For years, their grandparents hosted Christmas twice. Christmas Eve with her family and Christmas Day with his family. Now she knew why. Now she understood why her dad never talked about or socialized with her uncle. They'd asked many times when they were younger, her dad just said it was private. When all the kids were older, and the time was right, he'd tell them. Uncle Thomas was her dad's brother. "Hey Isabella," I said sarcastically. "Maybe you should text your uncle and let him know that Patricia will be back on the market in a few weeks, and let him know which hotel they'll be at this week. With his history with your mother, he might see this as a chance to rekindle an old flame for old time's sake." Saying that, I went into the kitchen and started making coffee. With the Southeastern Missouri newspaper in front of me, I began looking through the classifieds for a place to rent while I looked for something to buy. I knew that until Isabella graduated from college, Patricia would be allowed to keep the house. I knew I had to move out before Patricia got back. Judge Donald McDonald always put the needs of the children first in all his decisions. In many cases, that resulted in a lot of angry parents. Not being present in court, when ordered, was the same as signing your own death warrant. I knew the outcome of many of his decisions, so I made plans accordingly. I heard Isabella's cell phone ring. I knew she answered it and was talking to someone. I could hear her voice, but because she was speaking so softly, I couldn't make out what she was saying. They must have been talking for a while because I had made a few phone calls and started to look at some rental apartments. "Dad," Uncle Thomas admitted to it and asked me how I found out, Isabella said as she walked into the kitchen. I told him what was going on with our lives right now. He was quiet for a moment before he spoke, and then said that you deserved better than this, but that you did. He said if you were willing to listen to his story, you knew where to find him. After 18 years, I had to admit that looking back on that time, it might be time to hear the story from my brother. Clean-cut behavior forced me to look at that time from a different perspective. I saw both their behavior at the time as a complete betrayal to me. But I stayed in the marriage for my children's sake. I was old school. I didn't want my children to be raised in a broken home. I opened the liquor cabinet and grabbed a 40-ounce bottle of Jack before saying, "Isabella, I need you to drive me somewhere and then drive yourself home. If either of us are sober enough after finishing this bottle, I'll go home. If not, we'll go home when I wake up." He was waiting at our old favorite spot, a small fishing hole behind our dad's property. For a short time, we just passed the bottle back and forth before he told me his story. It was completely different from what Patricia had told me, so I knew the truth had to lie somewhere in the middle. After all this time, the truth didn't matter anymore. It was nice to hear him take responsibility for his actions after all this time. I think with what my wife was about to do, I could blame her for a lot more now. Besides, Thomas had always been a follower, not a leader, his entire life. We were both hammered when our father found us. He had seen the bonfire we built, and had brought out his shotgun to investigate because he thought he had to chase away some of the local kids. He loaded us into Thomas' pickup and hauled us back to the farm. Our mom was the same as she always was. She pulled out her cast iron skillet to cook up some eggs and potatoes for us to start the sobering process. It had been a long time since I had heard my dad say, "If the two of you want to get drunk and act the fool, do it here, 50 yards back in the back." Then, with a smile, he added, "Thank God you got it right." While we were eating, Mom called my daughter and Thomas' wife. When they arrived, we began to sober up. At least we weren't slurring our words anymore. Lisa looked at us in disbelief. Since she had married Thomas after everything had gone down, she had never seen us together. "Okay, you guys have made up," Lisa said. "After all this time, I think we all have the right to know why we were all broken up in the first place." I was going to say something, but Charlie put his hand on me like he used to when we were kids. He always motioned for me to shut up while he tried to talk us out of whatever mess we were in with Mom and Dad. He was always good at making up stories that people would believe more than me. I was expecting to hear another story, but I was wrong. "Patricia and I," Thomas said. "We were having an affair while she was pregnant with Isabella." I was wrong. I was young and stupid. My brother, the adult, caught us. He told me at that moment that I was dead to him, and to this day I still am. Finally, hearing why Thomas and I had ended our relationship in the first place, my dad said, "Damn it. If I were Clint, I'd have killed you." "What got you all into this mess?" Mom asked. "Patricia went to New York City with her boss," I said. "According to the hotel they're staying at, they only rented one room during that time. Abigail, Stefan's wife, and her dad had a private investigator following them. I'll get a copy of their lawsuit they've been served, and any other evidence they found." As I said that, I realized Isabella was learning that her mother and Stefan had planned this for a long time. It was difficult for Isabella to swallow because now Isabella saw her mother was looking forward to it. Isabella now understood why I had acted the way I did. "You should have let Dad go after that jerk, Dad," my daughter said, looking directly into my eyes. Nobody knew what to say, so I added, "Since Patricia will be allowed to keep the house as long as Isabella is living there and attending college, I need to find a place to live before she gets back." "Dad, I'm not living with Mom," Isabella said. "Wherever you go, I'm going, we'll do this together." Isabella was like me. When she said something, she really meant it, no matter what the cost. "Isabella, come with your mother for a minute," Mom said, and they went upstairs. My parents' home was a large, two-story farmhouse. When they returned, the two of them had decided that Isabella and I would move in with them for the time being. All we had to bring was our clothes. My daughter berated me on the drive home, saying, "Dad, you have to stop protecting Mom or any of us. We're all grown up now." She went to New York City knowing exactly what she was going to do with Stefan, thinking she wouldn't get caught. To me, that tells me what she truly thinks about you and us. After arriving home late Monday night, we started slowly moving the things we wanted. Each of us took our favorite TV. I took my recliner, she took her makeup table and mirror. Throughout the week, Patricia called to give us updates on how things were progressing. Progress was being made on her end, but it was slow. Abigail called because she decided we should finally meet. We arranged to do that on Thursday night at Logan's Roadhouse around 8 o'clock. I showed up in a business suit with no tie. She was there in a dress and a sweater. I recognized her by the white scarf she was wearing and walked up and introduced myself. She was very attractive. It was clear to me that she was a few years younger and as healthy as a horse. Her long blonde hair, soft blue eyes, and slender frame were designed to attract attention. For most men, her curves would be a wide-open invitation to step in and get to know her. She was naturally beautiful. What struck me the most with such a great figure was that she was very conservative in her attire. Stefan had just proven himself to be a fool to me. To have something as great as that waiting at home and to pursue my wife, who was at least 5 years older than me, was just beyond the realm of reason to me. Why would someone go for comfort food when they had prime rib right in front of them? I learned she was actually 10 years younger than me. Her 2 young daughters were 8 and 10. I explained that I had 3 sons and a daughter ranging from 23 to 18, but only one at home. She was a kindergarten teacher. Her clothing and her modesty now made sense to me. I was the HR manager for a nursing home in town. I just assumed my kindergarten teachers were never that attractive. Abigail was the one who told me they would be staying in New York City through the weekend because they had only completed about 70% of the details. After that, they would have to put everything into legal language and sign agreements before they could leave. They would be served late Sunday night and early Monday morning by being awakened from a sound sleep. The hotel security, with the approval of the management, would let the private investigators into the lovebirds' room. She asked how I was handling it. I told her much better than the last time. We ended up talking about everything. I pointed out that the main difference between the two times was this time was intentional. The last time wasn't so black and white. She asked if I knew who the first one was. I told her it was my brother over 18 years ago, before our youngest daughter was born. Up until this week, we had not spoken to each other in 18 years. We made up last Sunday after I told my daughter, Isabella, I said. She made us work it out like when we were kids. I was hungover the most I had been in years. Abigail laughed, and I said, what made it worse was our dad caught us, like when we were teenagers, and hauled us home like we were still kids. Abigail thought that was funny but said it was great to be close to your parents like that. I told her that my youngest daughter and I were moving in with my parents until I could find a new place. I'd take my tools, sporting goods, and clothes and leave everything else. I'd keep Patricia's cell phone number active until Sunday night and then permanently block my wife's number. Abigail and I danced a few times at a bar nearby before parting ways for the evening. I went home in a good mood, contemplating everything, and was questioned by my daughter Isabella. She knew everything. She had to know everything. The next day, as we were getting ready for the new day, Isabella teased me relentlessly by repeating, Dad got himself a new girlfriend. Isabella and I had a wonderful Sunday dinner with my parents since we both had settled in. For my mother, it was a special time because she got to cook for a group of people again. She was happy that we both ate a lot and there was not a lot of food left over. At 1 a.m, I got a call. It woke me up after a sound sleep. Abigail called to confirm that when the hotel detectives let them into the room, both were asleep. The cams had captured everything as they were served in their bed. She had forwarded a temporary copy of the video of the event to me. I got out of bed, put on my pants, and went downstairs to make some water. I was just fixing myself a hot cup of black tea when my mother came up to me. Is the water hot yet? She asked. I stood up to make her one and said, check out this video clip I just downloaded to my cell phone. I listened and watched the expressions on my mother's face. Patricia and Stefan were caught naked under the bed covers. Their recorded voices conveyed their shock. Both looked like deer in headlights. There was no way anyone watching could say that what they were doing was completely innocent. She immediately sent a copy to her cell phone before putting it down. Patricia's in the doghouse now, Mom said. I like the look of utter shock on her face when she got served with the civil suit. Isabella and I blocked her number tonight, I said, because I was told they would be served tonight. Mom went and got her in my dad's cell so that I could show her how to do their cell by following along. It had been a long time since my mother and I had tea together in the middle of the night. It brought back a lot of fond memories for both of us. I went in and told the front desk to block any calls coming from my wife because I did not want to talk to her. At 11 o'clock, she came in and said, Look, she's been calling every 20 minutes. How can we stop it? What's his cell number? She gave it to me, and I said, I'll send you a video clip through text. Next time she wants to talk to me, ask her for her cell number. If she gives it to you, send her a copy and text her, letting her know that Isabella and I got it last night. That was the last I saw of her for the rest of the day. As she was getting ready to leave for the rest of the day, she said, I did what you asked. When she received it, I didn't get any more calls. It made me curious, so I watched it. If your daughter or you need anything, just holler. You're good. I nodded in agreement. Thanks, boss, she said. I deleted it and haven't told anyone. While my mom was cooking dinner before Isabella came in to help her, I told my daughter about what had happened at work. I got a text from an unknown number, Isabella said. It was a text from my mom asking me to call her. It didn't take long to figure out it was likely from Stefan. I'm thinking about 8 o'clock tonight when we get a call from your brothers, I said. Your mom will call them. More than likely they went to the house and found we were gone. If they do, they'll be shocked, Isabella said. I left a short note for Mom saying that I guessed she was letting her boyfriend Stefan move in, since his wife kicked him out. I found it funny because I knew Patricia wasn't going to tell our sons anything that forced her to admit what she had done. Dad, just have fun and turn off your phone, Isabella said. That way your brothers will have to call Mom to find out what's going on. So, that's what we did. For my daughter and me, it was a peaceful night, but not for the others. Later, we learned that my sons had actually been to our old house. As soon as they walked through the front door, they noticed my favorite recliner was gone. That led to the entire house being searched. It was clear Isabella and I had moved out. It wasn't until they got to the kitchen that they found their sister's note. When they called Isabella and me, their calls automatically went to our voicemail. That only added to their anxiety in their minds. They confronted their mother over the cell phone, who claimed she didn't know what the note meant. She also told them that she didn't understand why we had moved out. They called all over town to find us to no avail. In a last act of desperation, they called Uncle Thomas, who told them that after what their mother had done, for the second time, maybe his brother didn't want to be found. So, Jason and Justin told their uncle about the note and what it said. All I can tell you for sure is that Stefan is your mother's boss, and they were sharing a hotel room in New York City for over a week, Thomas said. You're old enough to draw your own conclusions from that. The boys were so devastated when they heard that they forgot to ask how and why Uncle Thomas knew. My sons in their search for Isabella and me spread the news about my wife and me splitting up faster and better than rumors could possibly travel. At the end of my next workday, my front desk person forwarded the call to me from my oldest son, William. After the salutations, he got right down to business. What's going on, Dad? He asked. Where are Isabella and you living now? Nothing really, because most of us know that we're living in a world where wrong is now right, and right is now wrong, I replied. Dad, let's not get religious here, he said. Just tell me the truth. Check your text messages for what I just sent, I said. That'll give you the answer to your question. Forward it to Jason, and if you want to talk, come to my dad's place after dinner. With that, I hung up, texted the video, and sent another text to Isabella to let her know what I had done. Less than 10 minutes later, William texted back, damn it, grandfather's at 8. My parents left my kids and me alone so that we could have a serious conversation about the current state of our family. Isabella and I listened to what they thought I should do in the future. The boys didn't see what their mother did as a big deal, and that I should get over it. We all make mistakes, look how many times I've forgiven you guys growing up. That set their sister off. You two may be my brothers, but you're both dead damn fools, Isabella said with anger. That wasn't a damn accident that happened. Mom and Stefan planned everything. The hotel room was booked for Mr. and Mrs. Stefan Truscott for a week before they left. As I listened to her talk while looking at my sons' faces, it was a look I'd never forget. We saw Mom drive away from our house that Sunday. She left knowing she was going to cheat, Isabella continued. She had him pick her up and seemed excited about what she was about to do. Dad offered to drive her to the airport. But no, she wanted to rub our noses in it with him. We might have been the things they laughed about on their way to New York. She didn't know we knew and didn't know we were onto their shenanigans. Isabella asked me why I didn't stop her, and I told her she'd lie and deny it. I said, your mother's actions made it clear she wanted out of the marriage. This wasn't an accident. It was all planned and intentional. Dad and I knew about 2 weeks before she left, Isabella said. Stefan's wife told us. That's why we had the video within an hour of them being served. You guys should know that your mother didn't do this to Mom, I said. She did this to all of us. Tomorrow, Mom's going to the doctor for STD testing. Each of my kids looked at me with their eyes wide. I'm doing it because I'm not sure she didn't have other lovers on the side, I said. Maybe this was the first time she's been caught. She's been going on business trips quite a bit over the last few years. Because of her behavior, I have to wonder if those were the same circumstances. Dad, you can't be serious, Jason said. There's no way Mom has had other lovers. Based on what we know, all of you can say that we'll find out the truth to those questions from your mother, can you? I replied. Her truth doesn't matter as much as the truth. If I don't have an STD, then we know that what you believe may be true. When I didn't get an answer from my 3 sons, I said, I'm going to go make a pot of coffee. My mother and father were outside the kitchen. They'd heard the entire conversation. Clint, you're approaching this the right way, my father said. I didn't even think about the possibility of others. As a lawyer in a firm that sues parts of the healthcare and pharmaceutical companies, it does raise the possibility that she's slept with others. She's always flying off somewhere because they're always in mediation before trials. Even if she had a separate room on those trips, I said, it's just a phone call from one room to the other. Because in our society, this truth is easily made into someone else's lie. I can't believe anything she says for the last few years." Just then my cell phone rang. It was Abigail, so I said I had to take this call privately. So I went out to the porch. "Hey Abigail, good to hear from you," I said. "What's up?" "I talked to Stefan, it's not going well. He doesn't understand why I'm divorcing him," she said. "He thinks I should forgive him and continue on like we've always been. I told him that my daughters are old enough where I don't need him in their lives anymore. That's when he realized the reality that I'm not in love with him anymore. He killed that love with his lies. Patricia, he said, was a bum when she wasn't working. She's trying to find a way to explain everything they've done. It seems like they'll be home Thursday afternoon because a settlement has been agreed upon." "Isabella, my daughter, and I blocked her number," I explained. "I told the front desk not to take calls from her. It got so bad she had to ask me to make them stop. I gave the front desk a copy of the video you sent and told her to forward it to Patricia. That stopped the phone calls. My wife now knows that we all know what is going on. She must have been devastated to realize she couldn't control the situation anymore. I told Stefan that his personal belongings would be stored in the garage until he comes to get them," Abigail said. "Then I told him that I changed the locks on our house. I just wanted to see how he'd handle it. I just got done having a long talk with my 3 kids, explaining that this may just be the most recent of her lovers, and the result was me going for a checkup," I said. When they asked why, I figured it was necessary. I said, "Do you think your mother would be honest about admitting there were others? I guess I'll take it day by day. Isabella and I have moved out." We talked for a few more minutes before saying goodbye. When I went back in, everyone was in the kitchen. All 5 of them were looking at me as if they were waiting for me to say something. "I'm taking tomorrow off," I said. "I have a meeting with a lawyer at 9. Since the 2 lovebirds may be flying home Thursday, I want them served as they get off the plane." I think that's when my sons finally realized the seriousness of the situation because they all teared up. That's when my dad said, "William and Jason, Stefan isn't the first man your mother was caught with, but he'll be the last. He's a better man than I am, because I'd kill the bastard's firstborn." "That's ridiculous," Jason said. "Mom said she'd never cheated before, and until we told her we had the video, she still denied she was having an affair." "You dummies," my mother said. "Why do you think your dad never talked to your Uncle Thomas until this week? They finally made up about it last Sunday." The boys were all shocked and looked at their sister. "Uncle Thomas admitted to it," she said. "He said that Dad didn't deserve this but actually did, when I told Dad that Thomas and he had made up." The emotions were still raw for everyone involved. I got up and started the water. All 3 of my kids were dealing with the fallout from their mother's behavior in their own way. As their father, all I could do was be there for them. I knew this situation would change their lives in the future, although they might never see it. How they dealt with it would forever define who they would become in life. The boys decided it was best if they went home and got ready for work tomorrow. As they left, the water was ready. I made a hot cup of tea for my mother and me. Since it was almost 11 o'clock, Isabella went to bed. That gave my mother and me a chance to talk. "They'll be watching you," my mother said. "How you handle everything in the future will help guide them." "I know, Mom. That's why I'm going to try to keep my cool about this," I said. "To do that, I'm going to let the lawyers handle this. I can't turn back time and undo what's happened. Other than killing her, the rest is really out of my hands." "For some people, that's the ultimate solution," my father said honestly. "You're right. But in my eyes, Patricia isn't worth going to jail for," I said. "Neither is Thomas." My father looked at me with pride in his eyes and said, "You're a better man than your father, son. Your mother and I must have raised you the right way." The lawyer I went to see listened as I recounted the events that led me to her office. I found it interesting that she took notes. When I said the name of the firm they worked for, her eyes lit up. "Mr. Clint Walker, do you know that I used to work for them?" she asked. "They have an ethics policy written into their HR manual that I still have a copy of." I guess she saw my interest because she said, "We can sue the firm along with the 2 of them. We might not get more than our legal fees the way the state court judges are looking at things these days, but it'll create a big problem for both sides." "Brenda Ferguson, let's do it," I said. "As far as I know, they'll be flying back from New York City and will be back here at 4:15 on the first flight from St. Louis that comes in this Thursday afternoon." After leaving a deposit on the bill, she said, "I'm looking forward to this. When they let me go, they said I didn't have the guts to do what it took to win. They're about to learn a very expensive lesson about how wrong they were. I left her office with the thought of David fighting Goliath. The firm my wife worked for was the biggest in the county, and it had 4 divisions. Our family doctor was mortified when he heard why I wanted to be tested for all the STDs. He had been our doctor throughout our children growing up. He never expected this, but he thought it was best to be sure. What I didn't know was that my oldest son, William, had called his mother after leaving my parents' house to let her know what was going on. When he told her that I was getting tested to make sure I was clean, she asked why. He told his mother outright that between Uncle Thomas and Stephen Truscott, none of us could honestly swear that there weren't more lovers she'd been with while she wasn't at home. She was going to say something, but William told her not to bother because she had been caught lying too many times now. Let things settle for a bit before explaining anything he said, because right now, we'd all view that as more lies. The firm that my wife worked for was served while the lovebirds were en route. My attorney requested $10 million in damages. She also made it clear in the lawsuit that the termination of the senior and junior partner would be considered an admission of guilt. As soon as the lovebirds got off the plane, they were served. A third party noticed that they weren't a happy couple, and my wife took a cab home. The doctor called me in for the shots. It turned out that I had a mild STD. Since it had to be reported to the county health department, Patricia would be called in and forced to disclose all her partners. My suit was on the 6 o'clock news. Patricia and Stefan's behavior was known by the public. I thought Brenda Ferguson was starting to play the game pretty effectively. Isabella called to return my text while she was going from class to class, and I told her about what the doctor had said. She called her brothers and let them know that their mother must have had more lovers, explaining why. I was sitting down to eat with my parents and daughter. I had declined because I had a dinner date. My daughter was constantly teasing me by asking if I was going out with the same person from the week before. When I said yes, she smiled and winked. As I was getting ready to go out, she texted me. The text said Dad got himself a new girlfriend. I found it amusing that after all we had gone through, she could still find some humor. Abigail Truscott gave a wide smile when she saw me walk into Red Lobster's. This time I was dressed casually, and so was she. "You don't do things in a small way," Abigail said with a chuckle. "My father said you were a rock star and really liked it. If that doesn't bring Stefan down a notch or two, nothing will." "My lawyer used to work for them and is using me to get even with them, with my permission," I said. "She has a copy of the Human Resource Manual allowing us to sue them for not enforcing their policies." "I'd love to be a fly on the wall at their office tomorrow," Abigail said. "It won't be a good day for them." The waitress then led us to our table. We both ordered alcoholic beverages, and Abigail handed me an envelope. "Inside is a sworn affidavit from 5 of Stefan's subordinates," she said. All were employees at the time. Their statements show that they were forced to comply with his sexual demands. "Oh, my lawyer's case just got a lot stronger," I said. Honestly, when she suggested this solution, she thought that, with the judge's view of things these days, we'd be lucky to win enough to cover her legal fees. I think this will help establish a pattern of long-term behavior. We both escaped the divorce and began to develop a friendship. I found myself really enjoying the time we spent together. It was almost midnight when I got home to my parents' house. I was sitting in the kitchen waiting for the water to boil so I could make myself a cup of tea before going to bed. That gave me time to reflect on everything that had happened since Patricia went on her trip. I was pouring the hot water into my mug when my daughter said, "Dad, make me one." I looked at my daughter and knew she was crying, so I said, "It's okay to cry. That's part of the healing process. Mom's surprised you've been able to hold on this long." She ran into my arms and let loose. I just held her until she started to calm down. When we finished our tea, she had calmed down. She asked me about my dinner date with Abigail. I told her that, honestly, we had just spent time getting to know each other, but it seemed like it was going to develop into a good friendship. Isabella asked a few questions about her, and I answered them the best I could. I had filed the reports for my lawyer during my lunch break on Friday. When she called me that afternoon, she told me she was busy getting additional sworn affidavits from another senior partner in the firm and asked if she could add them to the case as a class action for all the women involved in this case. It meant refiling and asking for a much larger sum. I told her to go for it. Before we said goodbye, She let me know that she'd heard through a friend that it had been a very bad day for Patricia and Stefan, although they had brought home a huge settlement and made the firm millions, which wasn't mentioned. My coworkers were very supportive, as were the other senior management people. I stopped at the bank and pulled out $1,000 in cash on my way home. When I got there, I hugged my mother and tucked the money into her apron. Yes, she caught me and looked at me with a look only a mother can give her son. Consider that a donation to cover the extra expenses while we're here. Okay, I said. It would cost me more if it were somewhere else. She was going to say something, so I looked at her before she spoke. Just this once, but not next time. Got it. I nodded in agreement, just grateful that she'd let me off the hook. Patricia Walker returned home to an empty house after a day of being treated as if she was a disease. Both she and Stefan were essentially out of a job. Her husband and his lawyer were suing the entire firm to the hilt. What she couldn't figure out was how her husband, Clint, could find a disgruntled former employee who would never find a partner to represent him. The problem wasn't the firm being sued. The problem was that Clint had used someone who knew all the tricks they would use to minimize the lawsuit before they even started. This put the firm at a disadvantage from the start. Finally, after pouring herself a glass of rye and Coke, she sat down and read through the entire divorce petition. It was then that she realized that both her husband and daughter knew about their plans when they watched them drive away. They even knew that they had registered as Mr. and Mrs. Clint to witness that, because it now proved to be the end of their marriage. She hadn't seen it send a message to her husband and daughter, who it was now quite clear. Even if that wasn't the truth, right now there was no way to fix the damage she'd caused. Her best defense was to ride this out until Clint got over his anger. Maybe then they could talk. William was right. Everything she did right now would be viewed as lies because of how people perceived what she had done. To have a little excitement and pleasure, it certainly wasn't worth the price she forced everyone to pay. She went outside to the front door to get the mail, thinking things couldn't get any worse. While rummaging through it to sort out the junk, she found an envelope addressed to her from the county health department. After opening the letter, she learned that I had tested positive for STD. Patricia was requested to come in for testing. Patricia sat down and started to cry. This was becoming a living hell for her. Over the past few years, there had been casual encounters on business trips, and it could have been one of 7 or 8 people who had given it to her. Clint would tell their children about the results. Her family would now believe she was nothing more than a slut. Stefan Truscott was sitting at the bar in a dim-lit bar on the Cedar side of town, trying to stifle his sadness, trying to figure out why his wife Abigail had filed. She had forgiven him for everything else, which is what made this time so different. He wasn't really paying attention to what was going on around him, so he didn't notice the man sitting in the seat next to him. From across the room, a few loud voices rang out that got everyone's attention. It quickly developed into a fight. Stefan turned around to look at everyone and was punched, not once but twice, very hard in the face. A voice from somewhere said, "I'm a friend of Patricia's husband, Clint. Every time I see you, I'm going to do this." What had you done to destroy a good man's life? The only thing he could see through the blood and pain was that it was a large African-American man. I knew this was coming to a head with my oldest son, William. It happened on Saturday afternoon when I was cleaning out a few stalls in my dad's barn. William was pretty stubborn, and once he was set on something, nobody could change his mind. He'd visited his mother that morning. Patricia was handling it poorly and had spent several hours crying on his shoulder. He decided the best thing for everyone involved was for me to bring her back, and we'd all go on with our lives as if it never happened. I knew arguing with him would do no good, so I let him rant and rave about it until he got it all out. "William, if you were married," I said, "and you found out your wife was sleeping with someone else, would you follow the advice you've given me?" He was dead silent, so I added, "You come here and tell me that me being married to a broad who spread her legs for anyone is good enough. A slut who doesn't have enough respect for herself to stay clean. That means to you, I'm nothing more than a piece of shit to be walked all over." His face turned white because he'd never seen that side of me. I was on a roll, so I added, "If you don't respect me as a person, and for who I am, then don't come back." I walked away and left him standing there with a bad case of foot and mouth disease. He was young and stupid. Just like I was when I was younger, he reacted without thinking things through. Now he had to deal with my reaction. William didn't really understand his behavior, so he went to talk to Uncle Charlie. After hearing what had happened, Charlie told William he reminded him of how stupid he was when he was younger. "Your mother chased your dad, William," Charlie said. "Your dad fell in love and it took 18 years for him and his brother to make up. You need to learn that there are always two sides to a story. Both sides display their emotions in everything they say about the situation. Your dad was right. Your mother has an STD and she didn't get it from Stefan. So, whoever she got it from, she brought it home and shared it with your dad. To me, that proves she saw my brother as a worthless, cheap, lowlife," Charlie's added. "After all that he's done for the family, that's the ultimate reward he gets. You telling him to accept that and live with it only makes your father angrier." "How you fix this is your problem, William," Charlie added. "But it's better if you fix it, because if you don't, you may lose your father forever. Our dad always said give the person who wronged you one chance. If they do it again, they're done. Your mother took her chance with your mom. It's sad that her behavior shows she never learned." It was a great day on Monday morning at the firm where Patricia and Stefan worked, because my lawyer had dropped my lawsuit against the firm. They were both back in good standing. They were both praised all day for their successful settlement of the case for their clients and the revenue they had generated. Stefan Truscott looked awful, but he made it in. He had 2 black eyes and a cut over his left eyebrow. In a private moment, he went to Patricia's office to tell her what happened and what had been said. The result was Patricia standing beside my car when I left the nursing home that day. She looked tired and drained when I walked out to face her. I had to be careful about what I did or said. "Tell your dog to go," Patricia said. "Stefan's had enough of his own problems to deal with. He doesn't need to look back because he needs revenge." "I don't understand what you're talking about," I said honestly. "He was attacked. He has 2 black eyes and a cut over his eyebrow," Patricia said. "The man said he was a friend of yours, and every time he sees him, he'll do this." I started laughing. I thought that was one of the best pieces of news I'd gotten in weeks. After calming down, I said, "If I knew who it was, trust me, I'd buy him a Texas Mickey Mouse. I think your lover got off easy. If I was behind it, he'd be dead." Just then, I got a text. I looked and saw it was Abigail. It said, "Come to me, as soon as you can. It's important." I had just finished reading it when another text came in with her address. I texted back that I was on my way. "I've never seen you cold or hard like that," Patricia said. "There's no need for this." "The bitch told the bastard," I replied, as I started to unlock my car. "To give me an STD because you refuse to keep yourself clean says it all. Hire your damn lawyer, and let's get a divorce." I got into my car, started it up, and drove away, leaving her there. I was tired of her lies and her moral compass forever. Abigail was at the door as soon as I walked up. She was visibly upset. "What's wrong?" I asked as I approached the front door. "Can I do anything to help fix this?" "A friend of my father's hired his cousin to beat up Stefan," Abigail said, "and used your name to send a message." I guess the big smile on my face said a lot. The relief on her face came quickly. "You're not upset or worried?" she said with some relief. "Not at all. I just want to know where he lives so I can send him a Texas Mickey Mouse as a thank you," I said. Instinctively, I pulled her into my arms and just held her for a moment. Abigail didn't resist. I reluctantly let her go. I was about to apologize, but she stopped me with a light kiss on my cheek. "Both of them are inside and want to clear this up with you," Abigail said while taking my hand. We held hands as she led me into the kitchen. I saw her daughters looking out from one of the bedrooms, so I winked at them and smiled. They returned my gesture in the same way. Abigail's father was a little younger than my dad, but I treated him with respect. When I saw the large African-American man, I smiled. "If you were of legal age," I said, "I'd send you a Texas Mickey Mouse for thanking you." Saying that, I reached out to shake his hand, and he accepted, adding, "The next time you decide to do something stupid, ask yourself if it's worth going to jail for. My dad told me that when I was your age, and it's saved me a lot of trouble." Once the ice was broken, the proper introductions were made, and shortly after that, her father said he should take the young man home. That left Abigail and me with her 2 children. Her daughters came out and introduced themselves. Livia was 10 and Lori was 8. I asked them what their favorite restaurant was. They told me that it was an Eastern European-style pizza joint called Zizzi's. I got down on one knee and said, "Young ladies, will you allow me to take you and your mother out there for dinner?" It must have been the monkey suit without a tie, because they both said yes. I said, "Okay, I have one thing I have to do before we can go." "What's that?" the girls said. "I have to call my mother and let her know I won't be home for dinner." They found that funny and giggled until we got to the house. Abigail and I walked into Zizzy's with the girls running ahead of us. We were sitting there eating when one of her coworkers saw her. As Abigail got up to get more pizza, her coworker stopped to talk to her. "Is he your boyfriend, Mom?" Livia asked. "I'm her son, and I'm her friend," I said without knowing where she was going with this. "Have you gone on a date yet?" Livia asked more directly. "I haven't asked her yet," I replied, "but I have to ask someone else for permission before I do." "Who's that?" Lori asked. "Him and his sisters," I said. The girls giggled before simultaneously saying, "You've got it because Mom said she likes you." When Abigail returned to our table, she found the three of us giggling and laughing as if we were old friends. I said I'd get more, and Lori said I'd go with you, so we went. Lori decided she was ready for dessert, and I put what she wanted on her plate. I thought she was going to come back to the table, but she waited until I got back. When we got back to her house, I walked the three ladies up to their front door. While Abigail unlocked the front door, I got down to the girls' level and thanked them for dinner. As the door opened, the girls ran inside to get ready for bed. That's when I decided to say goodbye. Being extremely awkward when it comes to dating, I decided it was best if I just said goodnight. So, after doing that, I started to leave. "Come back here, Clint," Abigail said. So, I turned back on the steps, so we were basically face to face. Abigail leaned in and kissed me on the lips. I kissed her back. "My daughter said you would ask me out on our first date," Abigail said. Was Livia wrong? Abigail had me flustered, so I explained what happened while she was talking to her co-worker. Abigail and I then sat on the front steps like teenagers talking. It took a while for both of us to admit that we cared, but were both nervous about what we were facing. Since it was almost the end of September, we decided to take the girls to the county fair next Saturday, and then figure out what to do from there. It was almost 10 o'clock when I arrived at my parents' farm. I walked into the house and found that everyone was still up. Isabella was happy to see me as soon as I walked through the door. "Dad, you're grinning from ear to ear," Isabella said. "It must have been one important date for you to be so happy." I had to explain to my parents and daughter about the events of my day after I was done with work for the day. My father thought it was funny that Patricia asked me to leave Stefan alone because he had too much on his plate to deal with. On Friday, my lawyer had the new lawsuit served on the firm. She named 4 senior partners and 16 female victims along with me in the lawsuit. She had the copy of the suit delivered to the senior partners' homes. 3 of the senior partners had been told by their wives' husbands not to come home. Brenda Ferguson was continuing her daily barrage of calls to Patricia asking for her divorce lawyer's name. My mother had the email addresses for many of Patricia's extended family. That night before I returned to the farm, she sent each of them a copy of Patricia and Stefan getting served. In the message saying this was not the first lover she had during these so-called business trips. It was just the first time she was caught. Clint had tested positive for STD. I was getting ready to pick up Abigail and the kids when Isabella said, "You really like Abigail, don't you?" "Isabella, the sad truth is that since the divorce started," I said, "a lot of the friends that both your mother and I have had for years have disappeared." "Abigail and I were drawn together by a common bond," I said. "So, developing trust in each other became easy. It's too early to say where our relationship is going, but I'm open to it." "Dad, if you need any advice about dating, don't be afraid to ask," Isabella said with a huge smile. "Just promise me that you'll introduce us to her before things get too serious." It seemed that Abigail was afraid of heights, so I spent about an hour with her daughters on the Ferris wheel. At their age, it was their favorite ride. We went along for the ride and just listened to it all. The 4 of us wandered to the food area. The kids decided they were hungry. Lori was riding on my shoulders because she was getting a little tired. We were standing in line for food when my brother Thomas and his wife found us with the 2 youngest. The 2 older ones were out with their friends. We were introduced. Lisa and Abigail took to each other immediately. As I got Lori off my shoulders, we sat down to eat. The 4 kids had someone their age to play with. The adults of us just followed them along. With the cost of going to the fair these days, I was out a couple hundred before long. Lisa and Thomas decided that they would host a family get-together on Sunday. They invited Abigail and her children. Abigail said she would love to attend, but her daughters were spending the day with their father for the first time since he went to New York. Around 6 o'clock, all 4 kids were very tired. Abigail had just gotten her daughters bathed and in bed when she got a call from Stefan. He wasn't going to pick up the kids on Sunday. He was in the ER to get stitches. It seems he had been attacked again. Abigail told him that it couldn't have been Patricia's husband because he was at the fair all day with me and the kids. Stefan wasn't impressed. I called my brother to let him know the kids were coming. I reluctantly left her house around 9 because we decided we would start dating. I picked up the new ladies in my life at 2 in the morning on Sunday and went to my brother's house. Isabella and her current interest were there, so were my parents. All of Charlie's clan was there. My 2 oldest were the last to show up. To be honest with my brother, it was a big event. It was the first time in his married life that I had been to his house. Lisa was ecstatic to introduce Abigail and her 2 daughters to everyone. It didn't take long for them to be accepted. I found it amusing when my oldest told his father that we needed to talk. We walked to the edge of Thomas' property. "Dad, I messed up," William said. "I let Mom manipulate me. She had me going crazy when I visited Mom last week. Uncle Thomas and a couple of my coworkers set me straight." "What's the lesson learned?" I asked. "First of all, when it comes to family," William said, "it's best to stay out of it because no matter what you do, you end up making it worse. You have to let them work it out in their time, not yours." "You're right, but it's the hardest thing to do because we care so much," I said. "Your mother and I will be able to talk someday, but that day is a long way off because of what her behavior shows." "How to behave?" William said. "Yes, to behave because that's the one thing you can't argue or explain," I said. "Look at Abigail, she was in a loveless marriage until she thought she could support her daughters on her own. She chose to endure it until the right time came for her. Her behavior says a lot more about her character than anything else." "Her behavior took your sister and me by surprise because of how vicious she was," I said. "No matter what she said with her voice, her behavior made most of what she said a lie." "One of the things that your grandfather taught us when we were younger," I said, "is if I'm not worth being honest with, then you're not worth lying to." "Dad, this question has to be asked," William said dejectedly. "What else did she lie about?" "That's a question that'll never have an answer," I said. "There's no need to waste time looking back, son. All we can do is learn from it and move forward." "I like what I see in Abigail so far, Dad," my oldest son said. "But the more I find out about Stefan and Mom, the more I see they deserve each other." Isabella walked up to us and said, "Your private conversation is getting noticed. Maybe you guys should save the rest for later." "We're done, sis," William said. "I just wanted to apologize to Dad." William left us and Isabella asked, "What was that about?" "A bad case of foot and mouth disease," I explained. "It's nice to see he was smart enough to admit it." Thomas and Lisa went above and beyond with the spread they had prepared. Lisa took a ton of pictures of all of us together. Lori was a hit because she kept checking on me. When the kids got into a water gun fight, I joined in. Of course, the battle ended up 4 against 1, and I was as wet as a drowned rat before they got bored. I was sitting in a lounge chair when Lori crawled into my lap and went to sleep. I caught a glimpse of Lisa and Abigail talking about the budding relationship between me and her daughters. My dad sat down beside me and said, "That girl's got you. Be careful. Make sure you don't get caught up in getting even with Stefan." So I told him about our relationship from when Abigail first called me, up to this point. He smiled and said, "I should listen to my own thoughts on this. Your mother pushed me into having this conversation with you. Whatever you two decide in the future, I'm behind you." Look at our society as a whole. A lifelong Democrat who was one of the greatest presidents this country had ever seen, JFK gave up his party membership, ran for the same office with a Republican and won. The next election, the most conservative members of Congress refused to run for re-election. What was left in the Republican Party was leaning toward the views of what JFK had. Yet, the mass media filled the airwaves with hate, propaganda, and lies that made him out to be a peddler of Democrat values that he always had. He didn't change, but the views of the people looking at him had changed. He was still a Democrat, JFK. Now they're trying to convict him for something he says he didn't do and impeach him. At the same time, they're trying to elect a man to the same office, who proclaims he did what they're accusing the president of doing. "What does that mean?" my dad asked. "They have the same views of truth, honesty, behavior, and morals as my soon-to-be ex-wife. Those who aren't New Democrats are just trash that they need to get rid of from society. Truth, honesty, and good behavior mean nothing to them unless they're convicted and go to jail. Then they again falsely proclaim how sorry they are." My dad laughed and replied, Everyone needs to learn to flush 100% of the truth they see through mass media and social media down the toilet. It's hard enough to find honesty in real life for anyone. But most people are too stupid to realize that. I'm surprised I'm finally seeing that we're just two versions of Democrats fighting amongst themselves. That simple truth explains a lot without saying anything. Besides, with all the accomplishments he made while everyone was against him, I have to wonder if it's their hatred or because his accomplishments made them look so incompetent, I said. Most of the people who are running for re-election have years of experience accomplishing nothing but getting re-elected again. Damn it, Clint. That's harsh, my dad said. That proves how effective the mass media is as a propaganda machine. On Monday, when I was at work, a detective came in to look into the ongoing matter that Stephen Truscott was going through. It took about an hour for me to explain to him what I knew, and the list of women that their wives had just found out about him cheating on them with their wives. Detective, I suggest you go see Brenda Ferguson and ask her to give you the list, I said. It's been over 6 weeks since I knew about their relationship. Abigail Stephan's wife called me to tell me about what they were planning. At least 4 weeks since they went on their romantic getaway. I first met his wife when he was in New York to sleep with my wife. Since then, because of what was going on with my soon-to-be ex-wife and me, I've gotten closer to his soon-to-be ex-wife and am now in a relationship that's still trying to figure things out. That certainly paints a different picture, the detective said. Stephen Truscott has his own reasons to point the finger at you. It seems he's blaming you for the breakdown of his marriage, not his own behavior. I'm starting to believe that he's one of those types who can't take responsibility for anything and blames others. After he left, I called Brenda and informed her about what had just happened. She'd been expecting this to happen. Stephen was a backstabber and she believed he was behind her being fired by the firm. Brenda then informed me that my wife finally had retained a lawyer. When I got home to my parents, I learned that it was my mother's emails that forced Patricia to give in. Up until then, she'd felt there was a way for us both to work this out. When I got over my anger about the situation, I realized Patricia had to believe I had sent the emails to get even. On Wednesday, Isabella and I took Abigail and her daughters to dinner at Olive Garden, where my sons also joined us. During the meal, I revealed that Patricia had finally hired a lawyer to work out the terms of the divorce. Both of Abigail's daughters seemed to be smitten with Isabella for some reason, and Isabella stole the show. All in all, Abigail and I thought dinner had been a success. It had been 2 months since the family gathering. On a Friday afternoon, I sat beside Brenda Ferguson waiting to be called by Judge Donald McDonald. My soon-to-be ex-wife and her lawyer, a divorce lawyer from the same firm, sat on the other side of the room. We had agreed on the terms of dividing the marital assets, and since the house had no mortgage, it was basically very straightforward. Patricia had agreed to buy back my share of the house based on the current appraisal and give me half of our joint savings account. When we were called up by the judge, we each had to verify that we had agreed to everything. Once we had done that, the divorce was granted. Patricia stopped me on the front steps as I was heading down to the parking lot and said, "I've owned up to it. I finally confessed to the boys about my behavior. Isabella still refuses to talk to me because she feels what I did was intentional. I only wish I had seen the message I was sending." "I'd accept that explanation from our daughter because she lacks life experience," I said. "It sounds very selfish and self-centered coming from an adult." Abigail's divorce was granted. She had taken him to the cleaners. Stephen had to pay $1,000 a month in child support, $500 each, until they turned 18, and pay half the college expenses after high school. The house they owned would be sold, and the proceeds split evenly. For some reason, Stephen had resigned from the firm and moved to a different city miles away to start his own firm. I guess his continuous issues with getting punched when he least expected had taken their toll. With his equity in the firm assigned to him, he was set for life. My mother and father invited Abigail and her girls to dinner. What we didn't know was that my parents had also invited her parents. With Abigail and my developing relationship, they thought it was time to start getting to know her family just in case. Brenda Ferguson was currently in talks with the insurance company that was responsible for the liability insurance that the firm had signed with them. It seemed that the case was going to be settled out of court. With 4 firms, the senior partners who had gotten divorced, the insurance company was getting serious. After taking their 30%, all of us would be over $750,000 richer. We were all sitting around my mother's formal dining room, which had been used for the first time in years, just to relax after a fabulous dinner. As I stood up, I pushed my chair back and got down on one knee. I pulled a ring box from my pocket and said, "Abigail, will you give me a second chance and marry me?" Abigail was completely stunned and said, "Yes." Yes, that's when the party really started. Mom had to call Thomas, Lisa, and my two sons back for the news. Within half an hour, they showed up. In the excitement, I noticed Lori was crying, so I slid over to where she was sitting on the floor and sat down beside her. She immediately crawled into my lap. "What's wrong, Pumpkin?" I asked softly. "Nothing, I'm just happy you're going to be my dad," Lori said. I looked up at Abigail. She was crying. I guess she could see it in my eyes. I stood up while holding Lori and went toward her mother. Everyone knew that this was a big bonding moment. Livia came over and stood beside us. "Dad," Livia said, "when Mom and you get married, are we going to get your last name too?" "As soon as the court allows it," I replied. "Livia and Lori," my father said. "From now on, you're all set." My only thought was how much time my new daughters would spend with my parents. They both loved having someone to spend time with at the farm. My dad would be putting them on horses before long. Later, Lewis asked me privately how to get Stephen Truscott to agree to allow me to adopt his daughters and legally change their names to mine. I told him to let me handle it. That's when we started to look for a house. The plan was for Abigail and the girls to move in until we got married. I surprised Stephen Truscott at his office about a month later. His receptionist told me to go right in. So I did and closed the door behind me. His face was finally starting to heal, but his appearance had definitely changed a lot. He had 8 stitches. The detective had interviewed all the wives of his former love interests and still had no solid leads. I'd bet that he believed it was me. "I guess you've heard the news about Abigail and me getting married," I said before he could look up. Stephen's face went white when he looked up. I guess he really believed I was the one responsible for the damage to his face. "What do you want from me?" he said fearfully. "I need your permission in a legal document to adopt your daughters so they can legally take my last name. This isn't my wish, but it's Livia's, who asked her mother and me if her sister and she could take my last name. It's going to have to be worded in a way that legally acknowledges both of us as their fathers and allows their names to be changed to mine." "Why should I even consider doing that?" he said. "It'll make me disappear from your life forever," I said. "If you don't go along, you and I might run into each other quite often with our mutual friends." It took him half an hour to type and print out the item I requested. I knew he didn't care about his daughters because he hadn't visited them since he left New York. He had his receptionist, who was also a notary public, sign and stamp it. According to Abigail, he had only married her because she was pregnant. When his family found out, he was forced to give in to their pressure. I arrived at Abigail's kindergarten just as she was getting out of class. I had to go into the office because I wasn't known to anyone at the school. I had one of the ladies call her to her office. She was surprised to see me. "Abigail, I promised you something with your daughters the day we got engaged," I said as I handed her the envelope I had taken out from inside my suit jacket. "I think this will allow us to give them what they want." She took it, opened it, and read the attached document. "How?" she said as tears welled up in her eyes. "Stefan still believes I'm the one who gave his face all those punches," I said. "I took advantage of his fear to get this. I think we can get this settled so that the day we get married, Livia and Lori can legally take my last name. Isabella told me the night we got engaged that you always keep your promises," Abigail said. "Do you think Brenda Ferguson will file the adoption paperwork and file the petition?" "I'll call her office," I said as I pulled my cell phone out of my pocket. "The receptionist should be able to answer that question. If she can, I'll schedule an appointment for a time that allows for you to get there." One of the female office staff couldn't help but hear our conversation and said, "Abigail, have you set a date?" "No, I want to, but Sint said no until he figures out how to get Stefan to agree to let him adopt his daughters," Abigail said. "He feels that if we become a family, then the kids' needs will be met when we vow to." We were able to see Brenda that afternoon. She was ecstatic for both of us. Within 20 minutes, she designed and printed the necessary papers. With the notary's statement provided by me, it would be filed with the court by the end of the day. It took about a week before we learned that the adoption and name change would be granted. All they wanted was the effective date. To decide on that, we had to have a family meeting. We scheduled it for Sunday because the movers were still going to be moving Abigail and the kids' stuff into our new home until the weekend. Abigail and I were both working the next morning when we were visited by the detective investigating the ongoing assaults on Stephen Truscott to inform us that 2 arrests had been made. One was another senior partner at the firm he had slept with, and an African-American man who had been a boyfriend and still believed they were in a relationship. Both men were charged with assault. My brother Thomas and his wife opened the door for the four of us. We were the last to arrive. We came with a large platter of Boston baked beans that Abigail had made. It was a breakfast buffet. After the greetings were done, my future father-in-law asked, "What's all this about?" "We want to announce that in 2 weeks, 6 days before Christmas," I said. "If we can use the small equipment shed at my parents' place, 2 things will happen. First, Abigail and I will say our vows, and second, the adoption of Livia and Lori will be finalized. They'll all take the Walker last name. Our honeymoon will take place next summer with our daughters," Abigail said. "It'll be either Disneyland or Disney World." It was a bit chaotic at that moment, but in a private moment, Livia came over and sat on my lap and said, "Thank you, Dad." "For what?" I asked. "For loving us enough to keep your promise," she replied. "Our other dad never did." I didn't say a word. I couldn't. I was so touched that from the innocence of a 10-year-old came something so profound that there was no answer. I just held her and hugged her tightly.